Hey everyone, Tommy Durfler, Sam Rice here with Lighthouse Wealth Group here on our podcast. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about our stories, our personal stories. So, for us, I think, anytime we go anywhere, whether it's, a social outing or cocktail party or dinner party, at some point it gets around where everybody that you haven't met before says, "Hey, what do you do?" And it's so funny because I think in our business, in our industry, once you tell them you're a wealth advisor, then the conversation is a conversation killer at that point.
That's right.
And so, but I think what's unique, even about hearing about other people's jobs and careers and what they do, to me, what's fascinating is how they got into it. That's the real story, not the title, not what industry they're in, but really kind of how they got into what they're doing, if, of course, they like it. So, what we want to do today is just tell you a little bit about our stories and really how we got into doing what we are doing. And so, once you hear that, I think it's a little bit more, hopefully, it'll be a little bit more engaging and intriguing just knowing where we came from. And so, how we got here, because a lot of times people, for me at least, it was going through college the first time and I thought I was going to be something completely different. And then next thing you know,
Yeah.
I get here and for both of us, it's the same. It's like, wait a minute, how we end up here?
The industry
So,
found us.
yeah, exactly. So, Sam, why don't you tell us a little bit how you got here personally, and your story, and what led you here?
Yeah. So I started out in the insurance industry and really wasn't able to affect people's lives in a way that I thought was the most beneficial way. I kept coming across people's investments, and whenever you're addressing life insurance, you're really only addressing one facet of their financial well-being. When I saw other pitfalls that we really couldn't address in the time being that we were with them, but were, really red flags in a lot of people's financial plans, not being able to invest on the security side and address those needs. So, I kind of did some soul searching and realized that I wanted to get my licenses and advise on the financial planning side more than just the insurance side. And it became special to me because giving advice in a way that which we do really was never talked about, at least when I was growing up around my family. And I just thought it meant so much and such a big impact to be able to share this with people's families. We've got this great amount of knowledge that's really able to help benefit people's lives. But, there's so much information out there. You had to go to a wealth advisor to try and figure out what kind of accounts were available, the whole slew of investments out there. And now there's too much information out there. So it's really overwhelming for people. It's like the flip side where there's too much information out there and you got to try and find out what's applicable to yourself because there's different types of accounts, different types of investments. And I really found that fascinating and made me want to spur a passion for diving deeper and going into the financial planning side. So started out my career at Merrill Lynch, and after a few years there, decided to make the transition here to Tennessee. And that's really where I get connected with Lighthouse Wealth Group and to be able to further our financial planning process and investment philosophy for our clients. And that's kind of what brought me here.
So let's go back to the insurance stuff for a minute. I mean, how was that? How were the
Yeah,
conversations?
it's a lot harder to, it's kind of like pulling teeth, right? It's the conversations that we don't want to have. They're important, but we really don't want to have them. And, we kept coming across all these people's financial statements, investment accounts, and that was really the conversation people were wanting to have. Let's not make this harder on ourselves. And, if we can help people out in this other way, it really makes sense. And those are the conversations that people were wanting to have,
You mean they
planning for the
didn't want to talk
future on the
about
financial side.
the doom and gloom and what happens if they are
Yeah.
if they pass away or if they get disabled somehow? They didn't. You're telling me they didn't want to have those conversations?
A little dreary. And yeah, and planning for the future, planning for retirement, planning for big goals down the road, planning for college, that was much more appealing of a conversation that people wanted to have. So I was like, why fight it? let's do the planning side of it on the investment side. What about you?
So hold on, slow down. So I'm trying to draw more out of you. Let me explore some of this stuff. Did your parents talk about money? Was money a part of the household conversation? Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, it really wasn't. We grow up, we just assume our parents have everything taken care of. No discussions really about money, investing, anything like that. Savings even really. Maybe a little bit here and there, but nothing substantial or repetitive. And it wasn't really till I got into college and I started learning a little bit more about the stock market, took a couple finance classes, accounting classes, thought that was really interesting, and then did an insurance internship in college as well. And that was kind of my first dive deep into planning side for anyone on an individual level. And so got a little taste of that, you know, brushed up on some investment strategies and stuff like that while I was in that internship, but that was really it. So started getting involved in the stock market actually in college, just buying a couple companies that I thought were really interesting, and then
What made you
didn't really
decide to do
do
that?
anything much with it.
What made you decide to do it on your own a little bit? Start buying companies.
Yeah, it was interesting after taking my finance and accounting classes, and you kind of get to learn a little bit about their balance sheets, what's good on a balance sheet, what's not so good on a balance sheet, and all this stuff is public information. So I would look up on Yahoo Finance, go through their balance sheets, see how their earnings were, that kind of stuff. And I had also a friend that was had been involved in the stock market for quite a few years already, who was in college with me, and so we kind of bounced ideas off each other here and there, and so we thought it was pretty fun to do at first, and then kind of just let that roll after college and didn't really get back into it. And I was doing real estate after college in Denver, and so kind of drifted away from that after I got out of college, and then got back into insurance and that transition from Denver.
Gotcha. So,
Yeah,
what was it like? When you first got into there, what was it like buying your first stock in your first company? Were you a little nervous? Were you overly optimistic? What was kind of your feeling when you did that?
I was probably a little bit overly optimistic and kind of dealing with real money for the first time. You're like, oh, let's make a click, buy a couple shares of this stock, and then you get to ride the fluctuations of the market and those companies and go through earnings, news cycles, what have you, and how they affect each company. So I thought that was really cool too. Not only do the numbers affect the company, but also the sentiment side of it. I thought that was really interesting too, because it's, as we've seen with companies like Tesla or Nvidia, sure, they've got good earnings, but there's kind of a lot more behind some of these companies that people kind of have a following towards and follow so closely, where they've got sentiment behind them, right? They're based on projections of earnings down the road, what the company may do down the road. And I thought that was really cool. I remember this vividly, and I still talk about it every once in a while. The first stock that I bought was Nuance Communications, which I thought was really interesting. And what they did was they were one of the first software companies to integrate voice communication into phones and cars. So being able to talk into your car to give it directions. I thought that was,
This would be like Siri, Alexa. I'm sure
yep.
there's a couple other names. Okay.
Yeah. It was kind of the first starts of that. And I think that was, man, that must have been back in 2010 or 2012. I don't even follow the company anymore, but I remember that was like my first big, I've done the planning, I've looked at their balance sheets, I feel confident about this. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, did really well in the stock and then sold it a little while later. I'm sure it's gone on to do better things at this point, but yeah, that was kind of the first big pull the trigger of buying my first investment, and then
All
just
right.
found a liking for it ever since.
There's some people that just do things for a job, and there's other people that do things for a career. I feel like some things are kind of a calling. It sounded to me like without you knowing it, you're kind of called to do this.
And it was kind of like not having that information at a younger age while growing up. Sure, I learned about investments here and there and stocks going through college, but just opening my eyes to all that there was out there and how this could help myself and how this could help other people and the slew of options that were available was really intriguing. One of the pillars of our company is constantly learning, and there's always stuff to learn in our industry. It's hard to be a master of everything. So it's constant learning, constant growth. That's been one of the rewarding parts of all of this.
So transitioning here, I think growing up, I had no idea I was going to be doing this for a living whatsoever. And
Yeah.
I kind of almost laugh because I was not your most scholastic kid growing up. I went to school, but it was just kind of what you did and then you got to go home and do what you really wanted to do. And so,
Yeah.
for me, it was always playing the drums and being absorbed around music. And so, my parents, every Saturday morning, we'd always, have to do our chores. First thing we do is we wake up, and then before we can go play or hang out with friends, we always have to do chores. And so my parents always had like loud music, blaring through the house just to make it more fun,
Yeah. It's a
and
great
so,
idea.
and what I found out, I was really intrigued by that, and I got exposed to all different types. And so I just started picking up some drumsticks and I was a part of, concert band, jazz band, marching band, all those
Hmm.
things, and just couldn't get enough
Yeah.
of any of it. And so for me, I remember going to my counselor in high school, and they kind of start getting you thinking of, school and,
What are we going to do
what you're going to do
after
after
high school?
completely. And so for me, they would ask like, well, what's your favorite subject? I say, well, band is. And they kind of like, oh
Yeah.
boy, this is a tough one. I didn't know what to say.
So what do you want to do after
And
band?
yeah, it was like one of those like, okay, that doesn't really help. But anyway, yeah, I just gravitated towards doing that. And so my thought philosophy without having a plan was, well, if I want to go to school, why don't I go to school for something I really want to learn? And so at the time it was music. And so I did that for about 2 years and studied music performance. And then after that, that's where I have a sibling. She was here in Nashville. I was in North Carolina where I grew up. And she just said, hey, I know you're trying to really, make this work, but why don't you come to Nashville? It's a pretty big music city and cut your teeth here. And so it was a really simplistic idea, but I thought about it. I was like, oh, that's probably a
Yeah.
pretty good idea.
Give it a shot.
Moved there and I got to play full time for about 2.5 years and, loved it. But really during that time, what I figured out was there are a lot of financial insecurities, and it's tough to make a
Yeah.
living at that. I found out that I valued security, and that's just something you don't really get
Sure.
in that business too often. So at that time, I decided, I want to do something else, but I had no idea what that was. So I thought about it and, I remember being in a hotel room at a gig, before the gig started and just thinking, man, what am I going to do? And what am I constantly thinking about? It was money,
Is this going to pay our
mainly because I
bills?
didn't have any.
Yeah.
And so that was like the light bulb went off. I was like, well, wait a minute, let me go back and study money. Let me go study how this works. What is a
Yeah.
stock? What is a bond? What's the right thing to do if you have it a little bit, and I was very intrigued by that. So I thought, well, there's no place better to go than to go back to school and learn how this works. And so I did
Yeah.
that, and I remember majoring in finance, and I remember taking my first accounting class. And I walked out of the first day and was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I was one of those rare kids that, while everybody else is like, oh, that's boring, this is horrible. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to learn more, and I was like, okay, I got a little taste of it and I wanted more and wanted to learn more. And so I knew I didn't want to work in that field or industry, but I knew that would help me if I was going to go into finance. It would kind of hopefully, what I thought at the time, give me an edge because so many places,
Give a good
finance and
background.
accounting intertwine. Totally.
Hmm.
So I remember I started working in a firm and was really as a very small firm. And I was literally a fly on the wall, just listening to advisors, talk to their clients. And I remember thinking, man, this is really cool because I'm going back to school and learning all these things. Why not be able to share that with other people that don't, have
Right.
the same passion I did? And so that was kind of my exposure. And so that's really how I got in the industry. And since then, I was just like a sponge because it was so new at the time, and it was like, oh, I kind of rediscovered another passion. I was like a sponge. I wanted more. Give me more. I want more. I want to learn how all these things
It's like
worked. And,
second college.
it is. And so I just wanted to learn. And that's, when I became a CPA, became certified financial planner, and realized how much was out there. And man, I just really
Hmm.
loved it. I really absorbed myself into all of that. And so being able to help other people, you know, when you tell people, again, going back to the conversation at the very beginning of, you tell people you're in wealth management and you're like, okay, there's quite
Yeah.
kind of quietness after that. And they're like, so what are you
Is
doing
this
this
going to kill the
weekend?
conversation?
But I felt like, hey,
Yep.
that's where my place belongs. And, that's why I'm here to help other people, because not everybody shares the same
Yeah.
passion that we do. And so for me, that was just really, really intriguing. And so, like I said, I've been doing this for 16, almost 17 years now, and still kind of have that passion. And that's why, one of our core
Yeah.
values is always seeking knowledge, because these things
Hmm.
change. It's never the
Yeah.
same. And so
Everyone's
it was,
situation is so different.
and that's what, it's almost kind of like putting a puzzle together, and it's, you got to
Totally.
incorporate, the technical side, then you got to incorporate the human side of this too. You got to incorporate people's fear. What are their hopes? What are their dreams? What do they want to accomplish with this money, whatever they have? What do they want to do with
Hmm.
it? And so that was really fun to be able to kind of marry the technical side, the emotional side, put those things together, and really help people
Yeah.
say, okay, what are your dreams? What are your goals? Let's use this roadmap, these tools to get you there.
That's
And
right.
being a part of that journey has been extremely rewarding along the way.
It's a giant puzzle piece trying to make all these things come together and taking our knowledge with their passions and their resources that they've accumulated. It's
Hmm.
every client situation is a new puzzle.
Completely. So that was, the fun part to me. And people think that, man, you went from a musician over here to, a wealth advisor. And I'm thinking, it's not as big as a gap as people think, because
That's a
music
good
has a
point.
lot to
You
deal
get to
with
use that
numbers.
creativity.
I mean, music isn't that far off from numbers. And,
That's right.
there is no right or wrong, right? It's a matter of what works best for you. And I felt like I get to
Yep.
be able to use both sides of the technical side and the creative side to people, really help people and hear their story, hear what they're trying to accomplish, and say, okay, now let's take all that information. Now, how can we help you get you there?
And then, on top of that, you develop some really amazing
Really
relationships with
interesting.
people. You get to learn about their
Yeah.
family, you get to meet their family, you get to build something that really helps people out for decades to come.